Number 10. Being a non-human cube? Christopher Hargreaves is quickly becoming one of my favorite characters in season 3 of the Umbrella Academy streaming series on Netflix. Like most of the rest of the characters and plot in this series, Christopher is a character inspired by their own comic book counterpart. In the comics, Christopher is still a non-human cube who is part of the Sparrows team. In the comics, they are a secret team that exists at the same time as the Umbrella Academy, working in secret to save the world, being brought together by Reginald Hargreaves, but managed by Grace, who the Umbrella Academy, even in season 3 of the show, still refer to as Mom. Christopher in the show appears to have fear-inducing powers and can also affect the temperature of the air around him, dropping it down to freezing. You wouldn't think a floating cube would be powerful, but of course, Umbrella Academy makes this amazing weirdness possible.
Number 9. Rainbow Girl. She is the first superpowered individual on this list affiliated with the Legion of Superheroes, but she definitely won't be the last. The team seems to be just a sticky flytrap for all the random and wacky superheroes out there in the universe. Unlike some others though, Rainbow Girl didn't actually make it onto that team, as her powers were deemed not useful enough. Instead, she made it onto the Legion of Substitute Heroes, which I'm assuming is the Legion that villains either don't listen to, or the Legion that just puts on a movie for villains to watch instead of just teaching them. Fighting them. Anyways, why is Rainbow Girl useless? Well, she can harness the emotional spectrum. Red for rage, orange for green, yellow for fear, green for will, blue for hope, indigo for compassion, and violet for love. But unlike the Lanterns, she has no ring to use the power through, and she cycles through the colors impulsively, meaning it leads to terrible mood swings.
Number 8. Street existence? I don't even know what to call this power set. Really, it kinda just has to do with what Danny is, their unique, I guess, physiology. Danny is a street, often known as Danny the Street, and sometimes when Danny has been hurt, Danny the Brick. Danny is a street that appears to those who most need a refuge in the world, the outcasts of society, if you will. Danny provides a safe haven for these people so that they can truly be themselves, living without prejudice or judgment. Being a street is weirdly powerful, and Danny can actually control what is on the street and its decor. Danny can also teleport to anywhere around the world to protect their citizens, which is also kinda weirdly OP for those who both live on the street and of course for Danny himself.
Number 7. Matter Eater Lad. Honestly, Tenzil Kem's power, one shared by his whole race, gives me more questions than it gives me answers. Matter Eater Lad's main shtick is that he can eat any substance of matter in any form, solid, liquid, or gas, in any amount at super speed. Bismalians, which are his race, come from a planet where over time microbes made regular food inedible. In turn, their species evolved to be able to eat any form of matter thanks to producing a variety of digestive enzymes that act on specific substances, making them easier to chew and digest. Bismalians can also metabolize food almost instantly, and if they gotta, they can consume tons of food in minutes. So where I am left confused is exactly where all that stuff goes. Not to get too into it here, but what's Tenzil's bathroom situation like? Also dental. I'm assuming their teeth are of a denser material than human teeth. One Bismalian who was part of the Yellow Lanterns ate people, which caused him to get his teeth removed as punishment, but he then had those replaced with Bismalian steel, allowing him to bite through almost anything. So my question is, could he not bite through anything before? Also, if Tenzil eats a whole asteroid, which he has done before, where does he poop? I just have so many questions and no answers. I would just one answer.
Number 6. Polkadot Suit. You wouldn't think a Polkadot Suit would be so powerful, and yet, whether we are talking Polkadot Man's suit in the comics or in the DCEU film, James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, either way, he's pretty OP. In the comics, Polkadot Man's suit is tech, where he can basically use the polka dots on his suit to turn them into any kind of weapon that he wants or a getaway device. All the dots kind of do different things. Pretty wild, but also pretty weird. The major flaw being that of course the suit can break down. While in the comics, Polkadot Man is a villain, in the DCEU, he's more an anti-hero, a forcibly reformed criminal who joins the Suicide Squad and ends up saving the world from Starro the Conqueror. Here, Polkadot Man's polka dots are actually more intrinsic to him, kind of like really his own power, and they appear on his skin. When he purges them, they can be used as weapons to take down enemies, acting like destructive projectiles. But also, he does kinda need to purge them, so there is that. Here, his Polkadot generation is explained as being the result of an interdimensional virus that basically Abner received after his awful mother experimented on him and his siblings. Also, I hope there's more Suicide Squad movies, and I hope we get to see more of his siblings and they're all like just the same actor but like different people that have weird powers. That'd be awesome.
Number 5. The Hulk. Everyone knows Hulk's ability to turn into a big old green monster and rip things apart with a strength that increases based on his anger. But what many of you may not know is that Hulk actually possesses a much more subtle ability to see astral projections and ghosts and even interact with them if he chooses. Hulk's astral form perception has come in handy when working with Doctor Strange as a defender. But why does Hulk have this ability? Well, Bruce Banner subconsciously feared his father's ghost would come back to haunt him, like literally come back to haunt him. And so the Hulk just developed this mechanism to allow him to look out for that ghost, and I guess other ghosts as well. There isn't really more to it. Hulk just developed the ability that is something usually reserved for telepaths. For the super intelligent Bruce Banner, it would make a bit more sense, but it's been suggested that for Bruce, the clarity of the astral forms is diminished when compared to the telepathically resistant Hulk's ability to view them. With Immortal Hulk and the connection to the One Below All, perhaps that could serve as some kind of fan explanation, but we don't have a real one, so
Number 4. Battle Precognition. Midnighter is another superhero who has unique powers that many simply don't really seem to think of, but when you do, you realize just how powerful he is. Midnighter basically has a chip in his head that allows him to parse out all the possible outcomes when in the midst of a fight. He can basically run through hundreds of possibilities when it comes to his opponent's next move in a matter of seconds, meaning that he almost always knows which move to make himself to best counter whomever he's fighting. In essence, he has precognitive programming, which allows him to see into the future and kind of better plan what moves to make in the moment in order to win against, well, almost any opponent, really.
Number 3. Superman. Back in the day, while Superman was a fairly new being, he would kind of have whatever superpower he wanted / needed at the time, until eventually his set table of powers was established. But there is one new power that appeared in 1958, Superman number 125, where Superman learned to fire a tiny version of himself out of his hands. After discovering a tiny spaceship that blows up in his face, Superman loses all of his abilities minus, interestingly, his invulnerability. Luckily, he gained the ability to literally fire a doll-sized version of himself out of his hand that had all of his powers and would go and beat up criminals or melt icebergs. What's hilarious is that Superman even got jealous of the little mini him. When a guided missile was on its way to the Eiffel Tower, he sent out his little buddy and an onlooker shouted, "How cute!" To which he said, "Cute? What nonsense!" Fortunately for Superman, his mini-me was destroyed by a kryptonite meteorite and Superman's powers were restored to him.
Number 2. Super Speed. Super Speed is one of my favorite all-time superpowers around. I think it is super powerful, crazy powerful really. And honestly, although I know we have famous heroes like the Flash running around, I don't think Super Speed gets enough hype or love or appreciation, which is why I wanted to put it on this list. I mean, the Flash has managed to save and endanger the world using his Speed Force powers on more than one occasion, showing you just how epic these abilities can be when / if you get creative enough. Well, I guess if the writers and artists are creative enough, rather. I guess I should say, since they're the ones telling us the stories. Super speed is a power that has been used to do a multitude of things, including speed learning and speed reading, which is probably one of my favorite uses for this ability. That and the ability to phase for people that can move that fast. That and time travel, which is another thing people can do with it. You can see Superman use his super speed to do some super fast reading, and you can even see in Marvel the mutant hero Tempo use her ability to manipulate time to speedily run an algorithm created by Forge thousands of times in a few short minutes in order to help her fellow secret X-Men find Deathbird's ship. Now that is more time manipulation, but still, what I'm saying is the faster you can operate something or read, the more you can get done and the more knowledge you're able to have. I mean, Superman, Flash, they could basically both be super geniuses if they just used their power in this way. in theory. Although some people might say that they are super geniuses. I don't typically consider Superman to be a super genius, but he could be one. Man can read like probably all the books in the world in like, I don't know, probably a day or something crazy. He's really fast.
And in at number 1 is El Guapo. Robbie Rodriguez, who goes by El Guapo, is a mutant from the Marvel Universe. But that kind of opens up a whole bunch of questions because Robbie doesn't seem to have any powers of his own, unless you consider his symbiotic relationship with his flying skateboard a superpower. His wiki page refers to this as a idiosyncratic manipulation, suggesting that Robbie actually has total control over his skateboard. But the problem with that statement is that his skateboard also acted with a mind of its own, like when it beat him up for cheating on his girlfriend. Now, an argument could be made that perhaps it's his own subconsciousness beating himself up for doing the wrong thing, but that's just a me theory, and Marvel did not state this to be true or even explain his ability at all, really. It's not telekinesis, and the board seems to have a mind of its own. I don't know, you tell me what you think. Number 10, Starbrand. Starbrand isn't so much a singular person as it is a power in and of itself. Right now, the current Starbrand in the 616 universe is Brandy Selby, daughter of Suzanne Selby, who became the Starbrand after the one before her, Kevin Connor, passed away. The Avengers stepped in and had to help Suzanne deliver little Brandy, an act that caused Suzanne to pass away and attach the Starbrand to Brandy. Since Brandy's birth, she's used the Starbrand to fly and survive without oxygen and in the vacuum of space, and she can use extremely powerful energy blasts that can take down multiple people at once. But the Starbrand itself is an incredible source of power, proven by other people who have wielded it. The bearer of Earth 723's Starbrand used the power to create music that can influence human behavior to the extent that he has unified the people of his world as a single hive mind. On Earth 541, the Starbrand bearer has conquered his world and installed himself as the head of a benevolent monarchical dictatorship, but like a good one that actually somehow works despite the lack of freedoms. Number 9, Mantis. Mantis actually got her start in comics when she used her abilities to reform Swordsman or Jacques Duquesne, which actually got her into the Avengers. Mantis's powers and abilities are more than what you may have gathered from her film counterpart. Mantis has complete control over her body, which in turn gives her peak human agility, the ability to accelerate healing through force of will, and an empathic nature, enabling her to communicate telepathically with and sense the emotions of others as psychic vibrations. She can also control her heart and respiratory rate and blood flow. Her master of the Kotati priest's martial arts, which focuses on the manipulation of nerve endings and pressure points, has enabled her to knock out beings as powerful as Thor, and her telepathic and empathic abilities are improved upon thanks to her 2 little antennae she has coming out of her head. It doesn't stop there though. Mantis also gained abilities when she merged with the Kotati, such as being able to communicate with both plants and animals and survive in space in a physically solid energy form. She can transfer herself from plant life to plant life across interstellar distances or dimensions, creating a new body from the plant life where she ends up. She can transmit and receive telepathic impressions, she has precognitive powers, and more recently she can fire powerful pyrokinetic energy blasts, form energy shields, communicate directly with cosmic beings such as eternity and death, and completely control her personal energies as well as her physical form. Number 8, Tigra. When Greer Nelson first came on the scene, she was just known as the Cat and was given powers tied to her costume. But that all changed when she became Tigra, mutating into a human-tiger hybrid in a ritual that bound her to the Cat People, which is a very silly name, but was a race of humanoid cats who were created in the Middle Ages. Now before you laugh at her for looking kinda silly, just know that in her tiger form, Tigra is granted some awesome abilities. Her superhuman strength allows her to lift over 10 tons, with her leg muscles allowing her to perform a standing jump of 12 feet. She can run at speeds of around 70 miles per hour, has superhuman durability, agility, reflexes, and stamina, and as we all know, cats have heightened senses and like to knock things off of where you carefully place them. And as far as I know, the former is the same with Tigra, whose senses are about 10 times that of a human. Tigra's eyesight can sense the infrared portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, allowing for night vision. She can more easily detect the movements of an opponent. Her hearing is so strong that she can detect a ball of tissue paper being dropped at a distance of 40 feet, and her sense of smell lets her track people. More than that, she can even detect subtle alterations in the composition of perspiration that reflects mood or emotions and is highly sensitive to pheromones. Her claws and fangs can cut through steel, and like Mantis, she is an empath able to enhance and control emotions to a degree. Number 7. Monica Rambeau. With the title of Captain Marvel, it's easy to not fully understand the powers of Monica Rambeau, but they are different to her other Captain Marvel counterparts, and in my opinion, she is my favorite of the characters to take on the title. After being bombarded with extra-dimensional energy emitted by a stolen device, Monica Rambeau acquired the ability to convert her body mass into and control any form of energy of the electromagnetic spectrum. Those energy forms include visible light, radio waves, electricity, X-rays, microwaves, infrared radiation, ultraviolet radiation, cosmic rays, and gamma radiation. But whenever she comes into contact with new forms of energy, such as neutrinos, Monica can mimic that energy's wavelength as well, given enough time, and she'll be able to actually transform into it. As you can imagine, there is a lot she can do with these various forms of energy: flight, speed of light travel, intangibility, invisibility, energy blast and absorption, hologram creation and appearance alteration, size alteration, power boosting, and she can even become a kind of hard solid light. Number 6. ShangChi. ShangChi is one of, if not the greatest martial artist on Earth. He was trained from birth to become the ultimate warrior. He can take on multiple opponents at once and can even defeat people much more superhumanly powerful than him. He is particularly skilled in Chinese martial arts, but his skill branches out to many more. In one case, he even worked with Spider-Man to create a new martial art based on Peter's powers. ShangChi also is able to manipulate chi energy, which he can use to enhance his strength and durability, and can even detect others based on their energy, like he did when he detected the psionically masked Jean Grey. But ShangChi gets a much more significant power boost when he is using the 10 rings. He can use the rings as projectiles, manipulate their size, and even use them to levitate and fly. The rings grant the martial master superhuman strength, durability, speed, and stamina, and he can even manipulate energies from the rings to do many things, including projecting said energy and creating an energy-based blast. And then just to top it all off, thanks to the other side of his heritage, ShangChi inherited his mother's psionic abilities to communicate with his blood relatives, even the deceased ones. Number 5. Moondragon. It may come as a surprise, but Heather Douglas is actually one of the most powerful human-born telepaths in existence. She gained her power after she trained under the Shaolin monks of Titan, thanks to Thanos' father, Mentor, taking her in. Her telepathic abilities rival and surpass even those of powerful mutants like Professor X. With this power, she has been able to mentally enslave an entire planet of beings who were constantly at war with each other, bringing peace to said planet. She has been in a psionic stalemate with the Sorcerer Supreme, and she's even straight up de-lifed a clone of Thanos who, at the time, had even greater mental powers than Professor X. Her powers are so powerful, in fact, that they can maintain themselves subconsciously, meaning that even if she is unconscious, she will maintain the effects of said powers. A huge part of her character, even the reason for her awesome Moondragon name, comes from the fact that she is, or was, actually under the influence of an extremely powerful entity known as the Dragon of the Moon, who has been manipulating her for a long time, even initially letting Heather believe she had overcome the demon. But thanks to this dragon, she has been able to take on a dragon form where she can move faster than light, survive in space, and was super strong and durable. Number 4. Jack of Hearts. Jonathan Hart is a hero you may not have heard of. Jack Hart was the son of a brilliant scientist, a scientist that created the ridiculously efficient liquid sci-fi fuel called Zero Fluid, that in a tragic comic book backstory was exposed to Jack and gave him his awesome abilities. Due to the cellular mutation that took place after his Zero Fluid exposure, Jonathan Hart is now able to produce pink concussive energy beams and blasts from his hands and body, taking up the incredibly clever name of Jack of Hearts, apparently in honor of his father's love of card games, and not because it's actually his name, basically. His biological structure was reformatted to basically give him the superhuman starter pack abilities, but his strength specifically has been able to lift 25 tons. He has enhanced speed, stamina, healing factor, and durability, able to withstand some pretty heavy hits and survive in the vacuum of space. But in addition, thanks to a symbiote energy sub-device, Jack went through another mutation which gave him the ability to think as fast as a computer can, and he can retain and retrieve stored information from the deep recesses of his brain, which is pretty cool. Number 3. Cersei. Cersei is a member of the Eternals, an evolutionary offshoot of humanity gifted with amazing powers and abilities to look after the human race throughout the ages. Which is similar to, but also just a smidgen bit different from the Eternals movie counterparts. As an Eternal, Cersei's body is augmented by cosmic energy, and she has total mental control over her entire molecular structure, which allows her and other Eternals to be immortal, indestructible, and invulnerable to anything which isn't stronger than the cosmic energy that augmented them in the first place. Cersei has enough strength to bench 20 tons, but thanks to her telekinesis, she can augment that to lift about 25. Her telekinesis also allows Cersei to fly at about 760 miles per hour. She can project cosmic energy in heat, light, or concussive blasts. She has telepathy that allows her to hypnotize weak-minded fools. She can teleport but hates it, and she is even able to project images from her mind, which is a super cool ability. Those are all the powers we don't see in the Eternals movie though, because arguably the ability that she has the most talent in is her matter transmutation ability, which allows Cersei to transmute nearly any item or being into almost whatever she wishes. Number 2. Darkhawk. The coolest name for the strangest mashup of ideas. Christopher Powell was the son of a cop and a district attorney. When he witnessed his father taking a bribe from a mob boss, he stumbled upon an amulet that gave him the ability to transfer his consciousness to the Darkhawk armor. Now this ancient Shi'ar magical armor is very cool, and it gave its user quite the set of abilities. Obviously the classic superhuman strength, speed, durability, agility, and reflexes are all here in excess, but the armor allowed for armament conjuration from the extra-dimensional expanse, and could manifest mutations from Chris's body at will. The armor had glider wings that allowed him to fly on air currents, but he gained an upgrade that brought his flight to interstellar distances and speeds. Chris is able to heal from even the worst of wounds by just switching back to his human body. The armor can generate force fields, generate dark energy blasts, give its user enhanced vision, and can switch to a bunch of different modes, going transparent, doubling up its armor, and fighting with even stronger weapons. The problem for Darkhawk is that he has this very Iron Man vibe that kind of mixes with a Wolverine vibe due to his fist claws. It also mixes with a bit of a Spider-Man vibe as well, and it all just didn't really allow him to stay relevant past the 90s. And in at number 1 is Hawkeye. Okay, look, hear me out. Yes, Clint Barton is essentially just a regular human man, but despite that, and likely because of his abilities and talents, he is considered a power level 4 according to Nick Fury's intel. Those aforementioned abilities include being a master of archery in the use of regular bows, longbows, compound bows, and crossbows, with basically perfect accuracy, able to fire multiple arrows at a single target in a few seconds. But he now also has near perfect precision with any aimed or thrown weapon. He is at the peak level of human eyesight possible. I don't know how you train that, but there you go. He is in peak athletic human condition with peak strength, endurance, and reflexes. He is an expert acrobat, tactician, and master martial artist, but listing off his abilities isn't really going to give you a proper understanding. So what has he done? In Avengers Volume 3, number 14, Hawkeye was cornered by 17 marksmen and took them all down without taking a single life. In Hawkeye Volume 4, number 1, Clint ran into a wanted criminal in a bar and took him down silently, fracturing his neck with a deck of cards. And there you have it. 10 Avengers team members, or maybe former team members, who all have powers and abilities you may not have known about. Got any suggestions for what I should talk about next? Leave it all down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe here at Top 10 Nerd for more nerdy content. I've been your host, Adam Andrews, and until next time, peace out, nerds. Coming in at number 10 is Iska the Unbeaten. This spot could as easily been taken by Domino, as Iska also has a form of limited psychokinesis, which is probability manipulation, or also known as the power of luck, which is probably one of the most unexplainable powers because we can't even say that luck is for sure a real thing. But Iska takes it one step further into ridiculousness with the power of being literally unable to lose. Iska has the power to always win, no matter what, whether that is individual one-on-one contests, votes, or wagers, or larger battles where she is a member of a group. In contests of skill, her powers might give her the talent she needs to win, or she might just win through, quote, improbable circumstances. In larger battles or wars, her powers detect the probability of both sides winning and have literally led her to defect from the losing side and join the winning side, meaning she still personally wins. It's not that we don't understand it, it's that it can't even properly be explained without sounding utterly ridiculous. Love Iska the Unbeaten though, great character.
Number 9. Seeing really well. When it comes to Iboy, many of his powers are tied to him having multiple eyes. I believe in total he has 57 eyes that cover his body. A lot of people relegate Iboy to not being that powerful because, well, his mutation seems pretty ridiculous. But in reality, having multiple eyes is extremely powerful and actually has tons of benefits. Kind of like how Cypher was initially thought to have a pretty useless power set with his ability to communicate and understand all languages, until we learned just how universally that actually could apply. The same could be said for Iboy. Trevor not only has multiple eyes, but can use them to perceive things others can't. He has microscopic, night, infrared, telescopic, thermal, and even chemical vision. He can also read body language immensely well, allowing him to see into people's true feelings, emotions, and psychology. And aside from that, he can even see through falsehoods and illusions, and see potential weaknesses in his opponents.
Number 8. Legion. David Haller was living in Paris with his mother when her home was invaded by a assassination team. They took out David's stepfather before his eyes, which kicked off his latent psionic powers, which he used to incinerate the brains out of the assassins. However, as he did so, he made telepathic contact with each of his victims, thus experiencing their thoughts and emotions as they died, which, as you can imagine, deeply affected David, forcing him into a catatonic state. The consciousness of the leader of the assassins, Jamail Karami, was absorbed and merged into David's mind. The terrible trauma that David had suffered had splintered David's personality into multiple alters, with each of these alters controlling a different psionic power. Because of this, Legion is an Omega level mutant able to create spontaneous mutations of different kinds that are accompanied by new personas or alter egos to govern each one of these new mutations. Now, David himself stated that he had in his mind 200 Omega level split personalities, but the X-Men Rogue stated that while she was inside Legion, she was connected to thousands of types of powers, and there were more, quote, being born all the time. How this works, I have absolutely no idea, but it does, and he is scary.
Number 7. Light Transmutation. Dazzler to me is such an underrated hero. Her powers allow her to transmute sound into light, which on paper sounds pretty lame until you realize just all the things she can actually use light to do, like make light lasers, just super cool. Although Dazzler, aka Alison Blair, prefers to use her powers to jazz up her concerts and musical performances with stunning light shows, although it's never really been explained if the sound is then muted thanks to her doing this or not. I'm assuming not, because people still seem to be able to hear her sing and her band play music. Dazzler also has been called on every now and then to play the role of hero. Daz proved herself to be so powerful throughout her own series, accomplishing things like facing the Hulk and not only surviving, but kinda beating him, and even being considered powerful enough to become a temporary Herald of Galactus.
Number 6. The Flash. Wally West is easily the fastest of all the speedsters out there. He has an almost spiritual connection to the Speed Force that allows him to do a great number of things, from traveling time to creating electrical energy constructs. Thanks to a heart condition, Wally has even been able to freeze time, which basically allows him to move at super speed without actually moving at super speed. And if you can explain exactly how that works to me, I will give you $1 single. That's all I got. The Speed Force is basically time, the representation of reality in motion, being the very cosmic force that pushes space and time forward. So how is it that people can hold chunks of it, or create lightning constructs with it, or absorb speed and momentum from other people or things? As a concept for time and a cosmic force, it is really hard to both wrap your head around it and explain the Speed Force and all the things that speedsters like Wally West and Barry Allen are able to do with it. You kinda just have to accept that this is what it is.
Number 5. Power of music. Going back to Dazzler, another power that seems to get overlooked with her and a few other folks is her singing ability. Although it's not specifically a superpower, there have been multiple times it's been kinda used as such. At one point, Dazzler participates in a singing competition with Enchantress, attempting to win Odin's favor. Although Enchantress is considered to be more beautiful than Dazzler, Allison still manages to beat her because she's just that good of a singer. And that's pretty impressive considering that Odin is the judge of this singing contest, so gotta impress Odin. And this is a competition where she's basically fighting for her life through song. There have been other such occasions in the comics where people have had to use the power of music to get themselves out of tough spots or to win favor. Music both in and outside of the comics is just a powerful thing. In the real world, even plants can be swayed by its influence and its power. The power of song.
Number 4. Jin Genie. Jin Genie was a mutant, but unlike almost any other mutant ever, her powers were directly dependent on how much alcohol she consumed. Becca Parker had the power to generate seismic vibrations proportionate to her amount of alcoholic intake. As you can imagine, being intoxicated in order to use your superpowers can be rather interesting. It seems like one of those things you should add to the list of things you shouldn't do while under the influence. Like, don't drive, don't operate heavy machinery, don't use your superpowers to cause seismic vibrations. That kind of thing. Unfortunately, we do not get to see her use her powers that much, or get an explanation for why alcohol fuels said powers, because Jin Genie is de-lifed in the same comic that she was introduced in. X-Force number 116 in July 2001.
Number 3. Elemental Control. Elemental Control is a power that on paper sounds great, but what if you just have one element that you control? A lot of people feel like, well, then it's not that great. There are a few different points here I'd like to make though on powers in regards to elements. There are those who people think are simply not as strong due to them being tied to, one specific element, and then there are those who are simply underestimated due to the fact that people think they can only control one element or one aspect of the elements, when in fact they can actually control many of those things. Namely, here we are talking about Iceman and Storm. Iceman might not sound so powerful. I mean, back in the day he was kind of more of a snowman even than an Iceman, who mainly used his powers to create ice walls and ice slides, but Bobby has proven over the years, as he's honed his powers, that manipulation of water in any form is really powerful. He can not only manipulate ice but also water at this point, and is almost immortal, as even when he's destroyed he can basically seemingly regenerate from just a single drop of water or like a piece of ice. He can also create ice golems, which may be sentient even. When it comes to Storm, you might just think of her as an elemental who can control, well, storms, but she can actually do much more than that. We've also seen her control temperatures, heating things up and cooling them off. In fact, Storm is really a master of all elements, so don't let her mutant name fool you. Storm is like an all-around powerful elemental, and not someone you want to mess with. And she's a great fighter, so Storm is really, just don't mess with Storm. Don't make Storm mad, it wouldn't be good.
Number 2. Color Kid. Ulu Vac from the planet Lupra is the hero known as Color Kid, and his name does indeed suit his abilities. Vac was struck by a multicolored beam of light from another dimension that granted him the incredible power to alter the color of objects and people, and that is literally all he can do. It's stated that this power is probably caused by him changing the spectrum of light around the person or thing, but there are no real explanations given. It also does absolutely nothing for him or anyone else. Color Kid decided to use this power to go and audition to be a member of the Legion of Superheroes, and what do you know, he was rejected from the team and his powers were deemed useless. While it may be true, it feels a little bit mean, but at least he got in with the Legion of Substitute Heroes, so there's that.
Number 1. Oniromancy. While many might not think about how powerful this can be, and might be quick to write dream powers off as, dreams aren't real, they're actually super powerful. We can look at a few different characters when it comes to dream manipulation. One of the newer additions to Marvel Comics in the world of mutants is Somnus, who was retconned to be a past lover of Akahiro's, aka Dawkins. Somnus's power allows him to put people to sleep and from there basically control their dreams. Therefore, although he and Akahiro only had a one-night stand, in their dreams they actually lived a whole life together. So that one night to them both was basically a lifetime. Similarly, we can look to DC, where we have the Lord of Dreams, now Daniel but formerly Morpheus. Although the Dream Lord of the Endless technically doesn't have a formal name and exists as long as there are dreams to be had. These two versions of the characters though are made to be distinct through the Sandman narrative, so that's why I refer to them as being different people with names, because that's how they're referred to in the comics. Dream has shown us over the years just how powerful manipulating one's dreams and nightmares can be. The answer is it can be like crazy powerful. People are always like, what are you gonna do, mess with my dreams? And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna like trap you in a nightmare for your whole life and then you'll die. How does that sound? Doesn't sound very good, does it?
Number 10. super mathematics. I'm not entirely sure how super mathematics works or what makes it different than regular math, but the ability to do complex equations on the fly could be useful for someone like Superman, and could explain how he's able to adjust his speed to match the velocity of a falling person, and catch them without seriously injuring them. This power is best remembered for a panel that shows Superman holding a jar of beans and guessing how many beans are in the jar by weighing them and calculating the number based on weight. Although in this panel he actually gets the math wrong by saying that 20 times 16 times 10 is 32,000. It's actually 3,200. I figured that out using regular math. Super mathematics made a more recent appearance in Superman Earth 1 Issue 1, when Clark Kent visits a research lab and immediately solves a complex equation that has been baffling the scientists. Number 9. Super weaving. Appearing in Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, number 15, this power was not actually performed by Superman, but by a distant but identical relative of his who escaped from the bottle city of Kandor. Van Zee wanted to marry Lois Lane, but decided to settle for her doppelganger, an heiress named Sylvia. In order to prove his love for her, Van Zee got her several elaborate gifts, including the wedding dress of Helen of Troy. Seeing that it was damaged, Van Zee unraveled the threads and used his super weaving to weave a new, more modern wedding dress. Now, since Superman is also Kryptonian, we can assume that he also has this ability. This could explain how Superman repairs his costume when it becomes damaged, something that comes up more often than you'd think. Of course, one could argue that super weaving is just regular weaving at super speed. Number 8. Shooting a mini Superman out of your hand. When Superman temporarily lost most of his powers while investigating a crashed alien ship in Superman number 125, he gained the strange ability to shoot a miniature version of himself out of his hand. This proxy had all of Superman's classic powers, allowing him to pick up Superman's slack while he remained depowered. This is obviously silly, but undeniably useful. Instead of facing danger head-on, Superman could send this miniature version of himself to do the work for him. It's an efficient delegation. Heck, that would be useful for anyone. Imagine being able to send a mini-me out to pick up your dry cleaning. Proxy Superman only lasted for one story before dying from kryptonite exposure, thus returning Superman to his full power. Number 7. Super Ventriloquism. Another power that hasn't been seen post-crisis. Superman used to have the ability to throw his voice and talk without moving his lips. While this is impressive, what makes this power really super is that it comes with the ability to perfectly imitate anyone's voice. This ability was used pretty consistently over the years to trick criminals into acting against their own self-interest, such as in the power's first appearance in Superman number 13, when Clark and Lois were being held hostage by armed gunmen. Superman used his ventriloquism to throw his voice so that Lois and the thugs would look behind them, giving him enough time to change into his super suit, run out the door, fly around the block, come in through the window, punch out the goons, and change back into Clark Kent before Lois could turn back around. Personally, I think that if he has the speed to do all that, he could have eliminated a couple of steps from that plan, but what do I know? Superman used this ability several more times to battle evil and to gaslight Lois Lane into thinking that Krypto the Super Pup could talk. This power would be useful in a modern context, as the ability to mimic any voice could be used to open, say, voice control locks. But being Superman, he could always just rip open any door. Number 6. Super reading. This is an ability that Superman still uses from time to time, but it isn't talked about very often. Superman has the ability to read at super speed and retain all of the information. Now, for the average person, this would be great when cramming for an exam, but the Man of Steel often uses it for more practical purposes. For example, in Superman Red Son, the Russian Superman uses his super reading in order to learn new languages in a matter of moments so that he can negotiate with his enemies in their native languages. In a more extreme example found in Action Comics Volume 2, number 12, when Lois Lane is gravely injured and Superman uses his super reading to read every medical textbook ever written in order to quickly learn how to perform life-saving surgery on Lois. This power is essentially a way to learn any skill you need in a matter of moments, so it's surprising that Superman isn't shown using it more often. But I suppose there aren't many practical skills you need when you can crush coal into diamond with your bare hands. Number 5. Time travel. In the 1978 Superman film, the Man of Steel spun the world backwards in order to turn back time and reverse the death of Lois Lane. This is the most infamous example of this, but you may be surprised to learn that this was not a power made up for the movies, and actually has precedent in the comics. Now, it's not that surprising that this ability would be useful, but what is surprising is what Clark chooses to use it for. In Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, number 20, Superman, having grown tired of Lois constantly snooping around, trying to prove that Clark Kent is the Man of Steel, decides to travel back in time to before he started working at the Daily Planet. Once back in time, he decides to instead get a job as a radio DJ, playing top 40 hits for the people of Metropolis, eventually striking up a relationship with his secretary, Liza Landis. In an ironic twist of fate, this time travel ends up making his life more difficult, as Lois still ends up meeting and becoming obsessed with Superman. Dealing with this and Liza Landis, who is also trying to prove that Clark Kent is Superman, makes Superman choose to return to his original future timeline because dealing with one double L initialed woman is easier than two. Superman is unsure if he made the right decision until Liza comes into the Daily Planet for an interview and Clark discovers that she has gained weight, leading him to think to himself, "Great Scott, that was Liza Landis, grown enormously fat through the years. Thank goodness I never married her. Whew." Yeah, real classy, Clark. Number 4. Hypnosis. One of the first questions people ask about Superman when they think they're being smart and original is, "Oh, how does no one realize that Superman is Clark Kent when all he does is disguise himself with a pair of glasses?" When asked this, I usually respond that actually he's not just wearing glasses, he's completely changing his personality and body language. And secondly, barely anyone assumes that Superman has a secret identity. They think he's just always Superman. If that doesn't end the conversation, I usually sigh and bring up the Silver Age explanation. You see, back in the day, Superman had the ability to hypnotize people with his mind, and his glasses, whose lenses were made from the window of the starship he came to Earth in, amplified this ability, hypnotizing everyone into seeing Clark as a different person than Superman. Of course, this doesn't explain why pictures of him don't give him away. Beyond protecting his identity, Superman was also able to use his hypnosis abilities offensively, such as in Action Comics number 555, when the Parasite stole his powers and Superman used his hypnotic lenses to make the villain give them back. Number 3. Tactile Telekinesis. Now, this power isn't what you might think. Superman isn't able to move things with his mind, other than in the movie Superman 4, when he used telekinetic vision to rebuild the Great Wall of China, but I am not talking about that. I'm talking about Superman's ability to telekinetically control any object he touches. Admittedly, that sounds pretty useless and confusing, but it is actually one of Superman's most important powers. Many people assume that when Superman lifts a large object, like say an airplane, the reason he doesn't punch through the plane is just because comics are silly and not particularly interested in explaining the science of how stuff works. That's where they're wrong, because comics are extremely silly and usually over-explain how stuff works. When Superman grabs a falling plane, he uses his tactile telekinesis to form a force field around the plane so that it is able to retain its structural integrity. Number 2. Shapeshifting. If you still think Clark Kent using glasses to preserve his secret identity is dumb, you're gonna lose it when you find out that he used to have the ability to shapeshift and could have just been doing that instead. Instead of using it to preserve his secret identity, Superman would use this power to impersonate other people, such as in Action Comics number 55, when Superman comes across two men about to wrestle to determine which of them will get to marry a woman named Maisie Day. When Superman finds out that one of the men has been drugged in an attempt to fix the fight, he knocks out the fighter, steals his clothes, changes his face, and wins the fight on his behalf. In an even more extreme example of this power, Superman once used this ability to impersonate an alien, showing that he is not limited to imitating humanoid features. While this is obviously useful, I feel feel like I have to mention again that it would be even more useful if he used it to create a better disguise for himself than the glasses. Number 1. Mind control and telepathy. In the same issue where Superman impersonated an alien from another dimension, he also displayed the ability to use telepathic will control, convince an alien to remove their interdimensional travel machine. This begs the question as to why Superman doesn't just say, use this power to make Lex Luthor decide not to be a criminal. Although there haven't been other instances of Superman using full-on mind control, his other telepathic powers have shown up here and there in older Superman comics. But their most surprising use, in my opinion, is to essentially function as caller ID, as demonstrated when Superman stared at a ringing phone and was immediately able to tell that it was Perry White calling. This isn't a problem now, but in a time before caller ID, the ability to screen your calls would be surprisingly useful for anyone, let alone the Man of Steel.
Number 10. Exceptional. Bailey Hoskins is known for being the worst X-Men ever, probably because his powers are pretty lackluster sounding, but managed to pack a pretty big bang when they do get used. Bailey's powers involve self-detonation, but the only thing is that activating his powers will actually also result in his death, meaning he can only use them once and doing so will kill him. However, he does end up doing this, and in doing so saves the world, or at least a world. His good friend and teammate Miranda has reality warping powers that are extremely powerful, propelling her into her own classification of mutant even, in terms of power level. But even then, this time around, it seems Miranda can't seem to interfere in this world at this time. It seems she needs some help from Bailey, and in sacrificing himself, he not only saves the world, but also seemingly helps Miranda to fix it and set it right again. Or potentially erase it. That's kind of what it looks like happens at the end. But maybe that's how you fix it. Just wipe it. Number 9. Funny Man. Funny Man is an odd superhero who is historically actually pretty significant, despite how weird he may seem. He's not just powerful for how much of a goofball he is powerful in a historical context, which I think means he deserves this spot. Also, I'm not sure if we've ever mentioned him on the channel. As far as I can recall, I haven't at the very least. Funny Man was a creation of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, after they both left DC and began what would become an epic and long-time legal dispute over the rights to Superman, not feeling they were being fairly paid their dues. And for those who don't know, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster are the ones that created Superman. Siegel especially was passionate about getting the rights to their character back. After leaving DC, they reconnected with former DC editor Vin Sullivan, who had started up his own comic book company, Magazine Enterprises. Jerry and Joe tried to create the magic of Superman again, but this time by teaming up to make something entirely different and new: Funny Man. Celebrating their love of comic book pranks and humor, Funny Man was comedian Larry Davis, who after a publicity stunt gone wrong, ends up actually catching a real-life criminal, and decides to become a bona fide superhero, using his jokes and funny pranks to apprehend and stop criminals. A wacky idea that sadly did not end up panning out in the end for Jerry and Joe, as the character only lasted 6 issues. Funny Man didn't have any powers, but he was miraculously and comically good at stopping villains with his antics, and sometimes even doing this completely by accident. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to show your love for our channel on perhaps another platform, you can head on over to Facebook, click that like, it really does help us out here at the channel, and thanks if you've already done it. Number 8. Dead Girl. I think one of the weirdest things about Dead Girl is that her whole thing is immortality, as she's already dead and basically can't die, with her mutant powers activating only after her death. And yet she did die in the comics, possibly due to a disease which ultimately caused her to fall apart from decomposition. That is the one thing she's meant to be good at, not dying, and yet it happened. Because she's technically already dead. Fortunately, that didn't stop Dead Girl from going on adventures, and she currently still is doing so, even despite dying. Joining the newly reformed Static X as they battle against Zeitgeist Team Excellent. Dead Girl's power allows her to reanimate herself, parts of herself, and to communicate with ghosts and even temporarily resurrect the dead. Number 7. Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur make for a great pair, especially as Moon Girl's power set allows her to swap her consciousness with Devil Dinosaur's consciousness. An oddly specific but super powerful ability. Moon Girl, aka Lunella Lafayette, actually has inhuman lineage and gained her abilities after undergoing Terrigenesis. Aside from that, she is also a super genius, and despite her young age, is likely one of the most brilliant and gifted minds that we have in the Marvel Universe. Also, when we're talking about weird power sets and weird heroes who are also super powerful, Moon Girl really fits the bill, as even outside of being a superhero, she's identified as a kind of oddball her entire life. In fact, she was super nervous about undergoing Terrigenesis because of this. Although she has embraced her weirdness, she was worried that this would just be another thing that would make her stand out more and turn her into even more of a freak than she already was. Aw, Lunella. I identify a lot with Moon Girl. I feel like she's such a cool and underrated character. Number 6. Elasti Woman. Elasti Woman. I love Rita Farr. She is one of the members of DC's Doom Patrol. In the show Doom Patrol, Rita might struggle to utilize and control her powers, still afraid of them and of her appearance while using them, as well as becoming, permanently stuck in her kind of creepy elastic form that she has in the show. But in the comics, Elasti Woman has learned to master her abilities. Rita gained her powers while she, as a Hollywood actress, was working on a set in Africa. She was exposed to volcanic gas, which allowed her to change the size of her body and limbs at will, also having the ability to stretch her limbs. John Byrne's interpretation of the character was also able to alter the size of objects just by touching them. And the current Prime Earth continuity version of her also has shapeshifting abilities. I also feel like DC's Doom Patrol series does a great job of capturing what shapeshifting or stretching powers would be like in real life, and kind of the whole horror and body dysmorphia aspects of them. Possibly it's one of the best live action interpretations of this kind of power set I have ever seen. Also, if you aren't watching DC's Doom Patrol, what are you doing with your life? Go watch it. It's so good. Number 5. Multiple Man. Multiple Man has a strange and yet awesome power. He can create duplicates, often referred to as dupes for short, of himself, and use them to do and learn all sorts of things. Why learn? Well, because when he absorbs these duplicates back into himself, he also gains all their memories and knowledge, as long as he gets to absorb them back, that is. We've seen a lot of weird stories with Multiple Man because of this part of his unique power set, including one where he had a baby with his girlfriend Siren, but because he had actually sent a dupe to sleep with her on the night the child was conceived, when he first went to hold their newborn child, because it was actually a product of a dupe, it got absorbed back into him. Lots of weird things about that. Well, that whole scenario. And then there was the time that he secretly sent a dupe posing as him, I mean technically they're all him, but they're not the real him, to hang out with Layla and their son together, Davy, when Davy took his first steps. This dupe tragically died during an attack on Madrox's lab in X-Corp, so he wasn't able to actually absorb him back, and therefore lost those memories forever. Ooh, sad, weird. Kinda awful, Jamie. I love when people are always like, man, Jamie, why are you always sending dupes to hang out with me? And Jamie's response is just like, I mean, technically the dupes are me, so you're just hanging out with me. Number 4. Crazy Jane. Crazy Jane is a member of the Doom Patrol, and honestly, that is a great team to look at if you want to find some superheroes who are actually quite powerful, but also just wonderfully weird. Jane is no exception to that rule. She's kind of like Marvel's Legion, who appeared only a few years before she made her debut over at DC Comics, first appearing in Doom Patrol issue 19 of the 1987 series, created by comic book writing legend Grant Morrison and masterful artist Richard Case. Crazy Jane is Kay Chalice, who within her has at least 64 personalities, each with their own personas and their own power sets. While this means she has a lot of power at her fingertips, the challenging thing is that Jane often struggles to find balance with the various personalities residing within her, and has demonstrated various levels of control over them, and they over her. Number 3. Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl is also one of the most ridiculous heroes when it comes to her premise and her power set. Although really what makes Squirrel Girl, aka Doreen Green, so strong of a hero, so powerful of a hero, and of a character, is her likability and her approach to heroism. She has a tendency to beat villains by befriending them and persuading them to stop their devilish and deadly plots. Although she has also summoned an army of squirrels in the past to help her take down even even some of the most famous and notorious villains, like early on in her career when she handily and embarrassingly defeated Dr. Doom. Squirrel Girl has also faced off and defeated the likes of Thanos and Galactus as well. I love Doreen Green. I want to be Doreen Green, she's so great. Number 2, Metamorpho. Probably one of the strangest but also most powerful heroes out there is Metamorpho. Metamorpho made his first appearance back in 1965 in The Brave and the Bold issue 57, and has also been known as the Element Man in comics. He has a very unique and interesting power set that allows him to transform his body or parts of his body into any element. This also gives him a pretty unique look as well. Metamorpho isn't the only hero to exhibit these powers though. At one point we also had Element Girl, whose story ended up turning quite bleak in the end, I must say. She assisted Metamorpho on some of his adventures, and maybe if we do a part 2, I will tell you some more about her on that list. Number 1, Dupe. By far the strangest yet kinda in a weird way most OP characters of all time from Marvel has to be Dupe. Okay, so he's at the very least the most strange, even if you don't agree that he's the most OP. And now we have his evil counterpart, Pood in Excellent. Oh boy. Dupe is pretty powerful because he has some fourth wall shattering level of awareness and is able to actually move between panels in comics, existing not just within the pages panels, but also moving into the borders and margins of that page as well, which I think is pretty wild. He's also demonstrated some powerful magical abilities as well as super strength, speed, durability, and even the power to resurrect, without the help of the Five no less. Yeah, because Dupe is also like associated with mutants, even though I don't really know if we've clarified if Dupe is actually a mutant, but he's definitely mutant adjacent at least.
Number 10, Aquaman. Now I'll admit this one kind of started out as a joke, you know, because nobody likes Aquaman, but like, I'm not too far off when I say he's got some useful powers. So Aquaman isn't really all that useless. People only really think that because of the Super Friends cartoon, but if you look pretty much anywhere else, he is pretty badass and is often one of the few things able to defend the world against invasions of demons and such thanks to his trident. This is the reason that he's at the very beginning of this list today. Now that being said though, outside of the water he is a little bit more vulnerable than he is when he's in the deep, but that doesn't make him any less of a threat for the baddies that he goes up against. Thanks to his Atlantean physiology, he possesses superhuman strength, stamina, and durability, alongside marine telepathy that allows him to talk and to command sea creatures, and he's also just a ruthless and capable fighter. No matter how much we all make fun of him, he has some pretty useful powers, so check him out in his first appearance in 1959's Adventure Comics number 260. Number 9, Rainbow Girl. Hailing from the planet Zolnar, Dori Adrison wanted to become a member of the Legion of Superheroes in order to work her way into the acting world. She started that journey after she managed to score a trip to Metropolis by using her powers to win the Ms. Zolnar contest. What powers am I talking about? Well, Dori has the ability to wield the powers of the emotional spectrum. However, she has very little control over it, and this results in some uncontrollable mood swings every now and then. Dori will turn red when she's angry, blue when she's hopeful, and she also has the ability to surround herself in a rainbow-like pheromone field that causes Dori to be found irresistible to pretty much everyone around. She's essentially a human mood ring, if you will. Needless to say, but with these powers, she did not make it onto the Legion of Superheroes roster and instead settled for a spot on the Legion of Substitute Heroes after marrying a wealthy man on Earth. All in all, there are worse powers that you could have, like I can see these being useful in some situations, but if given the choice, Rainbow Girl is certainly not the first person I would call if I needed help. Check her out in her first appearance in 1963's Adventure Comics number 309. Number 8, Maggot. As with most mutants, they're either really strong, really weird, or just really lame. Well, Maggot skips the first one altogether and is just really weird and lame. Born in South Africa, this mutant has probably the most unusual digestive system ever, as it houses two slugs named Eenie and Meanie, who are able to leave his body, eat anything they want, and then crawl back into his guts. Now, as gross as it sounds, this whole process helps him grow in size, stamina, and speed, and also turns his skin blue and his eyes red in the process. Pretty cool, right? Well, yes and no, because the slugs have to enter through his stomach in a very precise manner to be effective, meaning if they're even just a millimeter off, then nothing happens. Maggot also has psychometric powers, meaning he's able to see things from the recent past or the immediate future. Honestly, these are all very useful and good powers, but with how meticulous and finicky they are, it just makes for a terrible hero. And to top it all off, he is just not written in a way that makes for any satisfying battles. Check him out in his first appearance in 1997's Uncanny X-Men number 345, and let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with me. Number 7. Mr. Immortal. Craig Hollis, the leader and founder of the Great Lakes Avengers. Now you can probably guess what his powers are, right? He has the ability to heal and resurrect himself from any injury he faces, no matter how severe it might be, effectively making him immortal. He discovered the skill after several suicide attempts and eventually decided to make the best of it and fling himself into danger without fear because, I mean, if you can't die, what is there to really be scared of? The only real problem related to this insanely useful power is that he can still feel pain. And whenever he comes back to life, he goes into these crazy fits of rage because of how much pain he goes through while coming back to life. The only one who could calm him down was Dinosaur, his quote-unquote soulmate. However, after her death, there was no one able to really help him. Honestly, that's about it for this character if I'm being honest. Although he has this amazing power, he is incapable of using it to its full potential because he lacks training. Basically, he is just a walking, talking, raging punching bag that has died a total of 21 plus times. Check him out for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1989's West Coast Avengers, Volume 2, number 46. Number 6. Doorman. Another member of the Great Lake Avengers on our list today, Damar Davis aka Doorman is a guy who can use his body to make a door. As you know, his name states. Put a little less simply, Doorman is a class 10 teleporter with his body acting as a portal to the Dark Force dimension, and thanks to this connection he can allow people and items to pass through him and walk through any solid object that he is pressed up against. This was the only power he had for a pretty long time, although he did eventually gain the ability to levitate, which led to flight. But in regards to his main power, it's pretty cool in theory, but it only allows people to go to the room or space directly next to them, which is great, you know, if you're trying to make a quick getaway to confuse someone, but if you need a quick escape to, you know, anywhere else, then I think you're out of luck. Also, in a world of superpowered beings who can literally break down walls, teleport long distances, and even just straight up pick locks, he's not the most useful to have on your team, you know? In short, great power in theory, in practice, not so much. Check him out for yourself in his first appearance in 1989's West Coast Avengers Volume 2, number 46. Number 5. Color Kid. Born on the planet Lupra, Uluvak got his powers when he was hit by a beam of colorful light from another dimension while working in a science lab. The accident imbued him with the ability to change the color of any object, no matter how big or small, and then from then on he was known as Color Kid. Needless to say, but his ability was underwhelming to say the least, and he was denied acceptance into DC's Legion of Heroes and instead was forced to join the Legion of Substitute Heroes, which is essentially the B team, but probably more like the C team for superpowered crime fighters. I will say though, Color Kid did manage to make the most of his pretty useless skills. His color change abilities not only changed the hue of an object, but on at least one occasion was able to change the chemical makeup of the object and was able to save Superboy and Supergirl from a deadly kryptonite cloud. Not only that, he figured out how to tweak his abilities to throw off his enemies and to camouflage himself and others around him. Check him out for yourself in 1966's Adventure Comics number 342. Number 4. Cypher. Doug Ramsey was always closely related to Charles Xavier and his school for gifted youngsters from a very young age, as his dad was a lawyer who helped Xavier figure out all the legal aspects of everything. However, he wasn't actually a part of the school despite Xavier believing him to be a mutant. Doug's mutant power gave him the ability to understand and speak any language, human and alien alike, and while that is really impressive and would definitely come in handy, it's not super useful as a superhero, you know? This had the unintended effect of making Cypher a really annoying addition to the X-Men roster. He actually proved to be so annoying that a ton of fans wrote in begging him to be killed off. Realizing Cypher brought nothing to the table, series writer Louise Simonson complied. But every Marvel fan knows that deaths in comics are never permanent, and he was eventually resurrected, but he still sucked so much, even though he had new powers including advanced computer skills and also the ability to sense structural weaknesses in buildings. You know, he honestly just wasn't meant to be a superhero, I think. Take a look at this underwhelming hero story for yourself, starting with 1984's New Mutants number 13. Number 3. Almighty Dollar. With one of the best names in comic books ever in my opinion, J. Pennington Pennypacker was just an average certified public accountant before he attended a self-esteem camp known as Camp Run Amok. Turns out the camp was actually a front for a deranged scientist to use a special device to give people superpowers, and after being given superpowers without their consent, Pennypacker and his friends decided to put their abilities to good use by not only putting a stop to their captors, but also joining the NFL Super Pros crime fighting unit, earning themselves the name the Happy Campers. What was the power he gained, you ask? Well, J. Pennington Pennypacker gained the ability to shoot pennies out of his wrists. That's it. The only reason he's high up on this list today is because his power is actually kind of useful, just not in any battle unless it's a contest for who has the most money. Now that I think about it, we don't actually use pennies here in Canada anymore, so it might be pretty useless power in this day and age, but you know, whatever. Check Check him out for yourself alongside the other happy campers in 1992's NFL Super Pro number 10. Number 2, Friendly Fire. Now, not a whole lot is known about Friendly Fire, as in we don't know his real name, and his origins are pretty up in the air. With the power to shoot bolts of energy out of his hands, this superhero had the ability to easily be Section 8's strongest team member, but as his name would imply, Friendly Fire could only strike his allies. Sort of. He was a terrible shot, so he constantly hit his friends and not the villains they were facing off against. Once a member of the hero team Section 8, which was basically just a big old group of heroes that nobody else wanted to team up with. I mean, come on, their members consisted of a guy who carried around a window to throw at people, and another guy who just welded dead dogs to villains. Friendly Fire really looked like a superstar compared to these guys. His final adventure was probably the worst out of all of them though, because instead of hitting the villain with his powers, he ended up just straight up blowing off his own head. Check out this tragic yet hilarious story for yourself in 1997's Hitman number 18. And number 1, Hindsight Lad. Carlton Lafrage, the all-around nerd misfit who just blackmailed his neighbor Speedball into letting him join the New Warriors, which they begrudgingly allowed. Now calling himself Hindsight Lad, Carlton was best described as the most annoying character on the planet, using the only ability he possessed to help the team. The ability to analyze how things could have gone better after a failed mission. Yep, that's right, Hindsight Lad was that guy. The know-it-all who only tells you what you need to know after it's too late to be of any use. During the Civil War arc, the powerless Hindsight suddenly became bigoted against his former New Warrior teammates, even running an anti-New Warriors website where he effectively doxed them by revealing their secret identities. Oh, and not to mention he laundered official Avengers funds to buy himself a new costume. I will give him this though, I guess this ability is kind of useful so you know what not to do next time, but from experience, I am really not a fan of people like this, so I would hate every second of being on a team with him. Check out probably the most punchable character in all of comic books in his first appearance in 1993's New Warriors Annual number 3.
Number 10, Quintavious Quire. Well, you might think Quinton Quire, as he was previously known, aka Kid Omega, has no place on this list because he is so powerful. Lately, he hasn't proved to be as useful in the comics. Rather, in the dawn of X-Line, it's actually becoming a running gag that he is killed on a regular basis. Often coming in with a pretty decent plan of attack that either he messes up or everything just kind of goes sideways, whether he's appearing in comics like X-Force or Wolverine. However, despite the fact that his death toll continues to climb when it comes to his own death and resurrection count, it should be acknowledged that Quintavious is a master telepath and telekinetic, who is known for being an Omega level mutant, hence his alias as Kid Omega.
Number 9, NFL Super Pro. Now, anyone else remember when Marvel teamed up with the National Football League to make a promotional series about a pun-loving, crime-fighting ex-football player with superpowers? No? Well, that is totally okay, I also forgot about it too. Phil Grayfield, aka Super Pro, had his football career cut short after injuring himself while saving a child and decided to then take up a career as a sports reporter. Grayfield then just so happens to interview an all-ball chemist and superfan who just so happens to have invented a practically indestructible football uniform. Then for some reason a group of thieves comes in, takes what they want, ties Grayfield to a chair, and decides to burn up the rest of the scientist's things, including the suit. The combination of the heat and the fumes from the chemist's supplies end up giving Grayfield superpowers, which he then uses to pummel every bad guy in sight. What powers did he gain? Well, just invulnerability. That's about it. Sure, that's great and super useful, but other than that, he's just an average person, so if I were any other hero, I would honestly just leave him on the bench.
Number 8, Jubilee. For me, myself, even I originally thought of the 90s cartoon when I thought of Jubilee, that young girl who could shoot fireworks out of her fingers. Sure, it's distracting, but Jubilee was never really as useful in a fight because of her powers. But the reality is, it's not actually Jubilee's powers that made her appear less than useful in the X-Men animated series, which, by the way, has the best intro music of any cartoon ever, save for maybe DuckTales. Rather, it was likely her inexperience that simply held her back. In the comics, it's been hinted at that Jubilee is actually far more powerful than she sometimes appears. Her powers allow her to create fireworks, but they also give her the potential to detonate matter at a subatomic level, which means she also has the potential to create an explosion similar to the detonation of a hydrogen bomb, or even more powerful, a cataclysmic corksplosion.
Number 7, Matter Eater Lad. Now, I'm definitely someone who is pretty adventurous with what I eat, but there are some things that I absolutely refuse to eat just because I don't like them, like, I don't know, pickles. I really am not a fan. But that is where Matter Eater Lad comes in, the superhero who literally ate his way out of all of his problems. Tenzo Kim is an alien from the planet Bismol, and much like Stoneboy, Matter Eater Lad's powers are the result of his planet's inhabitants evolving in response to an unexpected tragedy. When all the food on Bismol became inedible thanks to some pesky microbes, the Bismolians adapted by becoming able to eat and digest anything and everything, which was apparently a good enough power to land him a spot on the League of Substitute Heroes. In addition to being able to put down random objects that he consumes, Matter Eater Lad can also analyze matter's contents, determining if it contains poison, and then he metabolizes his food quickly in order to obtain super speed, and use his special Bismolian digestive enzymes in order to make tough materials like steel just a lot easier to consume. Honestly, being able to eat anything and everything might make for a great party trick, and one that I would love to have in real life, but in the world of comics, it's not necessarily the most useful in the situations that anyone faces.
Number 6. Bouncing Boy. Chuck Tane is just what he sounds like, a superhero with the ability to resemble and act like a giant bouncing ball, which his superhero name is an obvious play on. His powers make him not only super bouncy, but also grant him great durability. While many write him off as being a fairly useless hero, and he did fail in his tryouts for the Legion of Superheroes twice, Bouncing Boy did manage to prove how useful his ability could be, especially considering he has worked hard to become a skilled combatant who also has the ability to calculate the correct trajectories for his bounces, allowing him to target specific and sometimes multiple assailants or points of interest.
Number 5. Stone Boy. A member of the Legion of Substitute Heroes, a group of C-list, moderately superpowered individuals who got together after being rejected from the Legion of Superheroes. Stone Boy is definitely an open book when it comes to his powers because there's not a whole lot below the surface. I say this because he is a member of the alien race from the planet Zwen, whose inhabitants turn to stone in order to hibernate their way through their 6-month-long winters. On Earth, Stone Boy generally uses his ability in some pretty odd and funny ways. Now originally he was unable to move or stay awake while in his stone state, further proving his, uselessness. So his teammates would throw him at enemies, drop him on their heads, or just use him as a distraction. Eventually, thanks to a bit of hypnotherapy, Stoneboy figured out how to remain conscious and even move while using his powers, but nevertheless, his skills are pretty underwhelming in a universe where mobile rock monsters and heroes are pretty much the norm. But I mean, hey, I can't turn to stone, and I'm assuming you can't either, so who are we to judge?
Number 4. Infectious Lass. Admittedly, Infectious Lass is not a master of her abilities, but if she were, gee, that would be something. She could quickly become the most useful superhero like that. Drura Sept is an alien from the planet Somater. Her people have bodies that house tons of microorganisms, which she uses on her enemies, making them sick. Unfortunately, she's not great at controlling her strange power, which sometimes leads to her infecting those that she does not mean to infect. Still, if she had better control, this power itself seems like it would be quite useful.
Number 3. Jin Genie. Becca Parker was a member of Ecstatics, a group of mutant superheroes who were more preoccupied with becoming rich and famous than doing anything altruistic, like, saving the world. What's her power, you ask? Well, she has the ability to generate seismic vibrations, which is pretty cool, right? Well, no, actually, because in order to use her powers, she has to be rip-roaring drunk. And the more drunk she gets, the more her power could grow. This is a pretty risque and problematic idea for a superhero, as her dependence on alcohol actually landed her on several most offensive lists. Not to mention, it also made her a terrible fighter. When she was drunk, Jin Genie occasionally aimed her seismic waves at her fellow Ecstatics team members, meaning she was often more of a liability than an asset. Thankfully for everyone, but not so thankfully for her, her career as a superhero was cut short when she died while on a mission. Honestly, I'm kinda glad I never learned about her as a kid, because the whole, drinking gives you superpowers thing is not a good message to send out to kids.
Number 2. Angel. Angel definitely has to be one of the least useful superheroes and mutants. At the end of the day, his main power is flight, which, sure, when the X-Men first came to be, was like pretty crazy, and even, dare I say, exhilarating. After all, who doesn't want to fly? While flight is by no means a useless power, the problem with Angel these days is it's kinda all he has, that and his hollow bones. Especially considering he is not Archangel currently, so he doesn't have metal wings with poison-tipped feathers, nor are his wings sharp enough to be used as blades. So as a mutant in battle, he's in theory pretty useless. But his power of flight is not. I would even argue that Warren Worthington III has a more useful power in his abilities as a businessman, which we'll likely see celebrated even more during the new X-Corp comic we're supposed to get sometime in the future.
And number 1, Razorback. Now I have to say, upon first glance, you would definitely not be able to guess what powers Razorback actually possesses. Think it has something to do with warthogs? Well, you would actually be wrong, because its actual power is the mutant ability to drive or pilot any vehicle very well, all of which he for some reason names Big Pig. Now it's not really explained how he got his powers or why he wears the warthog headpiece, but hey, I'm not one to judge. I wear high-waisted jeans and overalls, so to each their own. Also, I thought I should mention that the mane of his super stylish headpiece is also electrified, but that limited power is totally cancelled out by the indignity of having to wear an oversized furry helmet that not only limits mobility, but also peripheral vision, which is kind of needed for his whole mutant ability. All I have to say is that when you're in a universe with multiple characters that are capable of destroying literal planets, an expert wheelman really isn't all that helpful. However, in the real world, that is super helpful, because I know I've been in cars that I cannot figure out.